Welcome back to the channel. Been a minute since I made a video, and I want to start off doing post-draft content with one thing that's really bugging me about this year's class, and that everyone is bugging me about their interpretation of this year's class. So this one's going to be real quick. I just want to summarize the mistake everyone's making about this draft class, because we're all getting swallowed up by the same narrative, and it's wrong. So here's a set of numbers for you to remember, or at least for the next 5 minutes or so. 2-2-3-2. That's a number of players, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, that we tend to get having at least one top 12 season in PPR fantasy leagues in an individual draft class. Now, the average doesn't tell us much about an individual year, and that's an average between 2010 to 2021, just to give the last two draft classes a few years to actually score top 12 seasons, and also to account for the modern era of the NFL. 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. That's players drafted within the first 3 rounds who score at least one top 12 seasons. That should be a reasonable average expectation from an individual draft class in any particular year. Again, you go back to 2015, you only have 1 quarterback hitting that mark within the first 3 rounds and 0 tight ends. You have 7 running backs hitting that mark from 2017, the lauded class itself. And if you go to 2014, you find 6 wide receivers having at least one top 12 season. So each draft class is different, but if you want to set an expectation for what's going to come from an individual draft class, 2-2-3-2. Here's another set of numbers for you to remember. 3-2-4-1. That's the number of players, on average, drafted in the first round of the NFL draft through the first 32 picks. Or the first 31 picks in 2023, because that's the exact number of players drafted in the first round at each position this year. 3 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers, 1 tight end in the first round. Those are average numbers. But again, not every draft class is made the same. On average, we get about 10 players drafted in the first round with fantasy relevant positions. And that's what happened in 2023. Compare that to last year, the great class that everyone loves. 1 quarterback, 0 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 0 tight ends. So was it a good wide receiver class? Yeah, for sure. And we definitely saw that year 1. Don't get a lot of early year rookie production. We've been blessed with it twice in the last 2 rookie draft classes, and I think we've been a little spoiled. This year they only drafted 4 wide receivers in the first round, but that's above average. In fact, since 2010 to 2021, slightly below 4 wide receivers are drafted in the first round, because we do get years like 2018, 2019, where you only get 2 wide receivers drafted within the first 32 picks into the NFL. So 4 is double a class that we still really like the players from that year. In fact, Calvin Ridley, returning to the NFL this year, is increasingly, as we've expected, getting more and more expectation. And he's from the 2018 class. 2014 had 5 wide receivers drafted into the NFL in the first round, and it was a better wide receiver class. In fact, I'll go further. 2021, better wide receiver class than 2022, and there are only 5 wide receivers drafted in the first round in that year. Not only do we have an average number, which is above average when you consider the number of years where there are 0 drafted at model positions, including last year. The NFL, if it's telling us anything, is that there are a lot of players that are fantasy relevant this year, and that's only if you consider the first round, let alone till you get to the first 3, where that 2-2-3-2 number came from. On top of that, it's better in fantasy. If you go back through the ADP, or go back look at your own ranks, or go back look at how you drafted in previous draft classes. You don't have to, I keep track of that, it's how I try and improve. The certainty in this year's class is striking when you compare previous year's ADP. Let's look at 2017. Let's go all the way back to 2017, that lauded running back class. Only 1 running back was drafted in the first 2 picks. That was Leonard Fournette. It wasn't the best running back from that draft class, but it was definitely a hit. The second one was Corey Davis. And I remember drafting that year. There was a lack of certainty in the order those running backs should be taken. Christian McCaffrey, on average, according to DLF ADP, was the 3rd player taken off the board, followed closely by Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, and now Alvin Kamara. And Alvin Kamara was considered a very strong reach because he had a very unique profile. The certainty, the thirst for which we had for the top of that class was limited, and that shows up when you look at the consensus mocks that ADP is made of. The difference in rankings, the difference in draft order was a lot more drastic than the first 6 and 7 picks in this year's class. 2018, that year only 2 wide receivers were drafted in the first round, so it must have been a bad class, because surely that means it's a good or a bad class. Saquon Barkley, Darius Geis, Rashad Penny, Sony Michel, Kerryon Johnson, Ronald Jones, There are a lot of good players that came out of 2018, including Saquon Barkley, so let's not diss its name, not to mention DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley. But the certainty with which we had about who to draft where from that year was pretty much just Saquon Barkley. After that point, the certainty with which we had on those players in the mocks, in the ADP, in the history of what we actually experienced that year was a lot more shaky, and we got a lot of misses through those first 6-7 picks. We can go on. 2019, Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, Darrell Henderson was the next pick off the board. I would say the certainty of this draft class dropped off the board around about that point. Let's consider 2020. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor were the first 2 picks off the board. There's still a debate about which one was first, followed by J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, CeeDee Lamb. 2020 looks a lot more certain, a lot more like the 2023 draft class in terms of how certain people were at drafting these players in each of the individual mocks that ADP is made up of. Now, while there was a big blunder from some people about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, after that, it was a pretty solid hit rate with Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and then Jalen Reagor, and then Justin Jefferson. That's what's going on in 2023 as well. Now, I by no means want to suggest that we should continue to expect a lot of rookie year production from wide receivers like we've had both of the last 2 years, because that's not common and it will regress, I guess, just to throw out a nerd type word to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about, I guess. Eventually, we should expect less from wide receivers than we've been getting, but the certainty with which people are drafting them, the way you feel about the first 6 picks in terms of everyone pretty much wants the first 6 or 7 players off the board, seems to indicate that we should be excited about this draft class overall. The NFL is also telling us a similar thing with the rate at which they drafted players across the board at all positions at an average or a slightly above average rate compared to the NFL draft history since 2010. This is a good class. There are lots of fantasy relevant players at every position, even just looking at the first round, and that's before you get to the 2-2-3-2 number of players drafted inside the first 3 rounds who have at least one top 12 season on average from a draft class. That's what our expectation should be from this draft class. I think 2023 is hype. I think it's going to be great, and I think we should be excited about it, and everyone should hush. If you want to see my ranks, you can find them on Patreon. Like I said, I broke it all down in a Patreon post, but also in the last episode of the Dynasty Crossroads, me and Pat Currain broke down the NFL draft and talked about spots where we thought we were particularly interesting, relevant to 2023, and best ball leagues, and who we thought was going to be best from this draft class, so check that one out. If you're interested in more draft content, 3 episodes ago, I talked to Adam Harstead, and he tried to teach me how to play Dynasty as well, and that was a lot of fun as well, and had a lot of information that I think would be particularly relevant this time of year while you're playing in your rookie drafts. But yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.